In the grand lobby of Boston's most prestigious hotel, something impossible was happening. A man who shouldn't be there, wearing clothes that had seen too many winter's hands that trembled from more than just the cold, sat before a gleaming Steinway grand piano worth more than most people's homes. His fingers, scarred and weathered, hovered over the ivory keys like a prayer about to be answered. And then he played. The first note cut through the air like lightning through darkness. Pure, clear, impossible. Around him, the crowd that had gathered, men in $1,000 suits, women draped in designer elegance, hotel staff frozen in their duties, stood absolutely still. Some had their phones out recording. Others had forgotten their phones entirely, hands covering their mouths, eyes wide with something between shock and recognition. A woman in the front row, the hotel manager who had tried to throw him out just minutes before, stood with tears streaming down her face, her carefully composed professional mask shattered completely. The old security guard who'd been called to remove him leaned against a marble column, openly weeping. And the music seemed to come not from the piano, but from somewhere deeper, from a place of profound loss and even more profound beauty. Each note was a story. Each chord was a lifetime. But how did he get here? How did a homeless man with trembling hands and worn-out shoes come to create magic in a place that had slammed its doors in his face to understand that we need to go back? Back 3 hours. Back 3 decades. Back to where extraordinary gifts hide in the most unlikely places. Let me tell you about Elijah Washington. And let me tell you about the night that changed everything. Sometimes the most beautiful moments in life are born from the coldest nights. It was December 23rd, and Boston was wrapped in winter's harsh embrace. Snow fell in thick, heavy flakes that blanketed the historic streets in white silence. Christmas lights twinkled from every storefront window, creating a warm glow that only seemed to emphasize the bitter cold for those who had nowhere to go. The Grandview Hotel stood on Beacon Hill like a palace of light and warmth. 5 stories of red brick and white columns with golden light pouring from every window. A doorman in a long coat and top hat stood at the entrance, opening doors for guests who arrived in town cars and taxis, their laughter and perfume trailing behind them like silk scarves. Inside the lobby was something out of a dream. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine. A crystal chandelier that had hung there since 1892, catching the light and scattering it into 1,000 rainbows. Fresh flowers, poinsettias and white roses arranged in enormous vases. A fireplace big enough to stand in flames, dancing and crackling. And there, positioned in the very center of the space like a jewel in a crown, sat a Steinway Model D concert grand piano, its black surface gleaming, its presence commanding. The piano had been a gift from a famous conductor 50 years ago. It was played only on special occasions, only by masters. It was, the hotel liked to say, an instrument worthy of Carnegie Hall. Outside, in the shadow of a building across the street, a man stood watching the hotel. He'd been standing there for nearly an hour, snow gathering on his shoulders, like epaulets, his breath visible in the frozen air. His name was Elijah Washington, though almost no one called him by name anymore. He was 53 years old, though the streets had aged him beyond his years. His coat was 3 sizes too big, donated from some charity bin months ago. His boots were held together with duct tape. His gloves had holes in the fingers, the right hand worse than the left. But if you looked past the weathered exterior, past the unkempt beard gone gray too early, past the worn clothes and tired eyes, if you really looked, you might see something else. A certain dignity in how he held himself, an intelligence in his gaze, and something deeper, harder to name. A quality of profound sadness mixed with something that might have been hope, or might have been memory, or might have been both. For an hour, Elijah had stood there, watching the piano through the hotel's tall windows, watching elegant hands glide across the keys during a cocktail reception, watching the way the light caught on the polished wood, watching the way people gathered around it like moths to a flame drawn by beauty they couldn't quite name. His own hands, buried deep in his insufficient pockets, trembled. Not from the cold, though it was cold enough to make bones ache. They trembled from something else entirely. From memory. From longing. From a need so deep it had pulled him through the snowy streets of Boston on this December night, pulled him to stand here outside this cathedral of wealth and warmth, pulled him like gravity pulls water to the sea. Finally, as the hotel clock tower showed 8 in the evening, Elijah took a breath that seemed to come from his very soul. He crossed the street. His footsteps left prints in the fresh snow, and he walked toward the golden light of the Grandview Hotel. The doorman noticed him immediately. His professional smile faltered. His hand reaching automatically for the door hesitated. But Elijah didn't try to enter. Not yet. He just stood there looking through the glass at the piano, the way a starving man might look at bread through a bakery window. "Sir," the doorman said, his voice caught between politeness and protocol. Is there something I can help you with?" Elijah turned to look at him. Up close, the doorman could see that Elijah's eyes were a striking hazel clear and focused despite everything else. "That piano," Elijah said quietly. His voice was educated, refined even, a surprise that made the doorman blink. "How often is it played?" "Oh well, special occasions, sir. Weddings sometimes. Holiday events. We had a guest play earlier tonight, actually. Are you interested in music?" Elijah's laugh was soft, almost to himself. "You could say that." A long moment passed. Snow continued to fall. Inside the lobby, someone laughed at a joke Elijah couldn't hear. The fire crackled. The chandelier sparkled. And the piano sat waiting, as it had waited for 50 years, for the right hands to bring it to life. "I need to go inside," Elijah said finally. The doorman's expression shifted from curious to concerned. "Sir, I'm not sure I know how I look," Elijah interrupted gently. "I know what you see, but I need to go inside, just for a moment, just to see it. Please." There was something in his voice, a desperation mixed with dignity, that made the doorman pause. He'd worked at the Grandview for 15 years. He'd seen wealth and poverty, kindness and cruelty, dignity and disgrace. And something about this man, this homeless man with educated diction and pleading eyes, struck a chord. I'll have to call the manager," the doorman said. "But you can stand just inside the door, out of the cold." "All right," Elijah nodded, relief flooding his features. "Thank you." The doorman opened the door, and Elijah Washington stepped into the Grandview Hotel for the first time in 15 years. The warmth hit him like a physical force, the smell of fresh flowers and expensive perfume, the sound of soft conversation and crackling fire, the sight of that magnificent piano so much closer now, so real, he could almost feel the keys beneath his fingers. He took 3 steps into the lobby and stopped. Several people glanced his way. A woman wrinkled her nose. A man frowned. The receptionist behind the marble desk looked up, her expression shifting from welcome to alarm. But Elijah didn't notice. His entire being was focused on the piano, 30 feet away, black and gleaming and beautiful. Waiting. He took another step forward. And that's when Victoria Ashford, manager of the Grandview Hotel, emerged from her office and saw him. The night, as they say, was about to begin. But to understand what happened next, you need to know who Elijah Washington really was. You need to know about the boy who lived 40 years before this moment in a neighborhood where grand pianos were as rare as diamonds. Roxbury, Boston, 1975. Young Elijah Washington was 8 years old, small for his age, with knees that were always scraped from playing in the streets, and a smile that could light up the darkest tenement hallway. He lived with his mother, Dinah Washington, in a third-floor walk-up apartment that had peeling wallpaper and windows that rattled when the wind blew hard. Dinah worked 3 jobs. She cleaned offices downtown before sunrise. She worked the lunch shift at a diner near the hospital. And 3 nights a week, she sat behind the register at a convenience store in a neighborhood where the customers eyed her with either pity or contempt, depending on their own circumstances. Money was always tight. Often there wasn't enough. Elijah learned early not to ask for things. Not for new shoes when his had holes. Not for toys when other kids got them for Christmas. Not for seconds when dinner was sparse. But Elijah had something that money couldn't buy. Something that appeared one ordinary Tuesday afternoon when he was walking home from school, cutting through the alley behind Pemberton Street. He heard it before he saw it. Music. Piano music. Coming from an open window on the 2nd floor of an old brownstone. Someone practicing. Not particularly well, but practicing nonetheless. Scales and arpeggios repeated over and over with mechanical precision. Elijah stopped walking. He stood there in the alley, his worn backpack sliding off his shoulder mouth, slightly open, completely transfixed. He'd heard music before, of course, on the radio, in church on Sundays when Mama had time to take him. But this was different. This was live. This was real. This was someone's fingers creating beauty in real time, and something about it reached into Elijah's chest and grabbed his heart and wouldn't let go. The next day he came back. And the day after that. And the day after that. Every afternoon after school, he'd stand in that alley listening to whoever was practicing in that 2nd-floor apartment. Sometimes it was scales. Sometimes it was pieces he didn't know the names of. Sometimes it was just mistakes repeated until they became right. Elijah didn't just listen. He absorbed. Without understanding what he was doing, his mind was cataloging every pattern, every progression, every relationship between notes. His fingers would twitch in his pockets, pressing invisible keys. It took 2 weeks before the woman who lived in that apartment noticed him. Her name was Mrs. Chen, an elderly Chinese woman who'd taught piano for 40 years. One day she looked out her window and saw this skinny black boy standing in the alley, eyes closed, fingers moving. She came downstairs and stood in the doorway. "You like music?" Elijah nearly jumped out of his skin. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Ma'am, I wasn't meaning to bother you. Can you read music?" "No, ma'am. Have you ever touched a piano?" "No, ma'am." Mrs. Chen studied him for a long moment. Then she said something that would change his life. "Come upstairs. Let's see if you can do what I think you can do." 10 minutes later, Elijah sat at her piano, an old upright with chipped keys and a slightly out-of-tune middle C. Mrs. Chen played a simple melody. 5 notes. C-D-E-D-C. Play that back to me. Elijah's hands were shaking. He'd never touched a piano before. The keys felt cool and smooth under his fingers. He pressed where Mrs. Chen had pressed, and the same 5 notes came out. C-D-E-D-C. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows raised. She played something more complex, 8 notes with a simple rhythm. Elijah played it back perfectly. She played a full scale. Elijah repeated it, his small fingers finding each note with instinctive precision. She played a chord progression, something she'd been working on with a student that afternoon, something with sharps and flats and careful timing. Elijah closed his eyes. His fingers found the keys, and he played it back note for note, timing for timing, like he was reading from a score written on the inside of his eyelids. Mrs. Chen sat back in her chair, her wrinkled hands folded in her lap. She'd taught piano for 40 years. She'd had hundreds of students, some talented, some not. Some who worked hard, some who didn't. But this was different. This wasn't talent. This was something rarer. This was gift. What's your name, child? Elijah, ma'am. Elijah Washington. Well, Elijah Washington, how would you like to learn to play piano? His face lit up like sunrise. Really? But I don't have money for lessons, ma'am. My mama, she works real hard, but we don't have extra. Did I say anything about money? Mrs. Chen interrupted. I asked if you want to learn. Yes, ma'am. More than anything. Then you come here every day after school. 4 o'clock. Don't be late. And you practice what I teach you. You understand? Yes, ma'am. And so began the education of Elijah Washington. Every day, 4 o'clock sharp, he'd climb those stairs to Mrs. Chen's apartment. And every day for 1 hour, he'd learn. Not just how to play piano, how to breathe music, how to think in scales and progressions, how to feel the mathematics of harmony and the poetry of melody. Mrs. Chen was a stern teacher. She rapped his knuckles when his posture was wrong. She made him repeat passages until his fingers cramped. She pushed him harder than she'd pushed any student because she could see what he was capable of. And Elijah soaked it all up like a desert soaks up rain. Within 6 months, he was playing pieces that took most students years to master. Within a year, he was playing things Mrs. Chen had to look up in her collection because she couldn't remember how they went. Within 2 years, he was composing his own pieces, simple at first, then increasingly complex, pulling melodies out of the air like he was translating a language only he could hear. His mother noticed the change in him, the way he'd hum constantly, the way his fingers would drum on the dinner table, on the bus seat, on his own knee, the way he seemed lighter somehow, like the music had given him wings. This Mrs. Chen Dinah said one evening while they were eating dinner. Beans and rice again, but Elijah didn't mind. She's good to you. Yes, Mama. She's teaching me so much. And she doesn't want money, no, Mama. She says I'm paying her with my progress. Dinah was quiet for a moment, studying her son. He was 9 years old now, growing into his frame, losing the baby roundness in his face. But more than that, he was growing into himself. Into something she'd always sensed was there, but hadn't known how to name. You're special, baby, she said quietly. I always knew it. This music, it's your path. You understand your path to somewhere bigger than this. I love music, Mama. I love it more than anything. Then you hold on to it. You hear me? Whatever happens, wherever life takes you, you hold on to that music. It's yours. It's who you are. Elijah didn't fully understand what she meant then, but he would. Years later, when everything else was gone, he would remember her words and understand. When Elijah was 12, Mrs. Chen entered him in a youth competition. He played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that made grown men weep when played well. Elijah played it better than well. He played it like the piano was singing, like the notes were alive, like the music was breathing. He won. First place, a $100 prize, and a write-up in the Boston Globe Prodigy from Roxbury Show's Remarkable Talent. His mother framed that article, hung it on the wall of their small apartment next to a picture of Jesus and her own mother's photograph. She'd stand looking at it, sometimes tears in her eyes, whispering, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for giving my baby something beautiful." At 14, Elijah auditioned for the Boston Youth Symphony. He played a piece by Rachmaninoff that was technically beyond what they expected from someone his age. They accepted him immediately. Asked if he'd been studying at the conservatory. Couldn't believe when they found out he'd been learning in a small apartment in Roxbury from an elderly woman who charged him nothing. At 16, he was offered a full scholarship to the New England Conservatory of Music. Full ride, room board, tuition, everything. His mother wept when he told her. Not sad tears, proud tears. "You're going places I can't even imagine, baby. You're going to be someone. I'm already someone, Mama. I'm your son. You're my everything," she whispered, holding him tight. "You're my whole world." The conservatory years were golden. Elijah flourished. He studied under masters. He played in recitals. He won competitions. By the time he was 20, his name was being whispered in musical circles as someone to watch. A talent. A gift. The next great American pianist. At 23, he gave his first solo concert at Jordan Hall. The review in the Boston Classical Review called him a pianist of extraordinary sensitivity and technical mastery, combining power and delicacy in equal measure. Mr. Washington has a long and brilliant career ahead of him. His mother was in the audience that night in the front row, wearing a dress she'd saved for months to buy. She cried through the entire performance. After, when he took his bows, he looked right at her and mouthed, "Thank you, Mama." She mouthed back, "I love you, baby." 6 months later, she was dead. An aneurysm. Quick and painless, the doctors said, though that brought no comfort. She collapsed at work behind the register at that convenience store and was gone before the ambulance arrived. She was only 48 years old. Elijah's world shattered. For weeks he couldn't play, couldn't even look at a piano. The instrument that had been his salvation, his joy, his voice, he couldn't touch it. Because every note reminded him of her. Every piece he'd played, she'd heard. Every achievement he'd celebrated, she'd celebrated louder. And now she was gone. He was 25 years old, and he'd never felt more alone in his life. But music, as his mother had told him, was his path. And eventually, slowly, painfully, he found his way back to it. Not because the grief was gone, it never went away, but because he realized that playing was how he could keep her alive. Every performance was for her. Every note was a prayer. He threw himself into his career. At 26, he was invited to play with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. At 28, he performed at Carnegie Hall. At 30, he was being compared to the greats: Oscar Peterson, Bill Evans, Keith Jarrett. Life was opening up before him like a flower. And then he met Sarah. But that's another chapter of the story. One that begins with joy and ends with tragedy. One that explains how a concert pianist became a man standing in the snow, begging to touch a piano in a hotel lobby. We'll get there. But first you need to understand that Elijah Washington wasn't always homeless. He wasn't always lost. Once a long time ago, he was exactly where he belonged. His fingers on the keys. The music flowing through him like blood. The world listening. Once upon a time, Elijah Washington had everything. Sarah Mitchell was not the kind of woman Elijah thought he'd end up with. He'd always imagined himself with another musician, Someone who understood the strange hours and stranger obsessions that came with being a professional pianist. Someone who spoke the language of music as fluently as he did. Sarah was a pediatric nurse. She worked at Boston Children's Hospital on the oncology floor, one of the hardest jobs in the medical field, caring for children fighting cancer. She had no musical training beyond what she'd learned in elementary school. She couldn't read sheet music. She'd never been to a classical concert before the night she accidentally walked into Jordan Hall, thinking it was a different building entirely. She'd been looking for a lecture on childhood leukemia treatment. Instead, she found herself in the back of a concert hall, listening to a young pianist play Beethoven's Appassionata Sonata with such fierce intensity that she forgot to leave, forgot to find the lecture, forgot everything except the music and the man creating it. After the performance, she went up to him. He was signing programs, talking to admirers still floating in the post-performance haze. She waited until the crowd thinned, then approached. "That was beautiful," she said simply. Elijah looked up at her. She was tall, with dark skin a shade lighter than his hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes that were simultaneously tired and kind. She wore scrubs under her winter coat. She looked nothing like the classical music crowd around them. "Thank you," he said. "Are you a fan of Beethoven?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know anything about classical music. I just stumbled in here by accident, but I'm glad I did." He smiled. There was something refreshingly honest about her admission. "Well, now you know you like at least one piece. That's a start. Can I ask you something?" She leaned forward slightly. "How does it feel when you're playing like that? Where does it come from?" It was a question he'd been asked 100 times, usually by critics or music students or pretentious patrons. But from her in her scrubs and practical shoes, with her honest eyes, it didn't sound like a question looking for a clever answer. It sounded like genuine curiosity. "It comes from..." He paused, thinking. "It comes from the same place grief comes from. And joy, and memory, it's all connected somehow. The music is just the language for things words can't say." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand that. I work with dying children, and sometimes when there are no words left, when treatment has failed and hope is thin, the only thing left is presence, being there, bearing witness. Maybe music is like that, bearing witness to things too big for words." Elijah stared at her. In all his years of interviews and conversations about music, no one had ever put it quite like that. But she was right. Exactly right. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. I'm Elijah Washington." "I know. It's on the program." She smiled. "I should go. I have an early shift tomorrow. But thank you for the music." "Wait," he said as she turned to leave. Would you like to get coffee sometime? I'd like to talk to you more. About bearing witness." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Okay. Coffee. Here's my number." That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks through Boston Common. Walks turned into weekends together. Weekends turned into a year, then 2 years, then a proposal in the same concert hall where they'd first met. They married when Elijah was 31 and Sarah was 33. A small ceremony, mostly her family, and a few of his musician friends. Mrs. Chen came elderly and frail now, but beaming with pride. Sarah wore a simple white dress. Elijah played Clair de Lune as she walked down the aisle, his gift to her, his hands on a rented piano, creating the music she'd told him was her favorite. A year later, Grace was born. Grace Dinah Washington, named for Elijah's mother. She had Sarah's eyes and Elijah's cheekbones and a cry that could wake the whole building. She was perfect. Elijah had never known it was possible to love someone so much it physically hurt. The first time he held Grace, tiny and fragile and completely dependent, he wept. Sarah, exhausted in the hospital bed, smiled at him. "You're going to be a wonderful father," she said. "I'm terrified." "Good. That means you're taking it seriously." Those were golden years. Elijah's career was flourishing. He was playing concerts regularly, recording albums, getting reviews that used words like masterful and transcendent. Sarah worked her shifts at the hospital, coming home with stories that broke Elijah's heart and restored his faith in humanity in equal measure. And Grace grew toddling around their apartment, banging on toy pianos, singing made-up songs. When Grace was 3, Elijah started teaching her piano. Nothing formal, nothing forced. Just sitting with her at the bench, showing her where middle C was, playing simple songs together. She had talent, maybe not genius like her father, but real, genuine musical ability. More importantly, she had joy. She laughed when she played. She made up silly words to classical pieces. She turned Beethoven into bedtime stories. Sarah would watch them together, father and daughter at the piano, and think that life couldn't get better than this. This was enough. This was everything. She was wrong. On March 15th, Grace's 4th birthday, they decided to drive to Plymouth for a celebration. Sarah's parents lived there, and Grace loved visiting her grandparents' house by the water. It was a clear day, cold, but beautiful, the kind of early spring day that promises better weather ahead. They were driving down Route 3, about 20 minutes from Plymouth, singing along to a Disney soundtrack. Grace in her car seat in the back, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Sarah in the passenger seat, laughing at Elijah's terrible Elsa impression. Elijah behind the wheel, thinking about how lucky he was, how impossibly blessed. The drunk driver came out of nowhere. He ran a red light at 60 miles an hour, hit them on the passenger side, metal screaming, glass shattering, the world spinning, Sarah screaming, Grace crying. Elijah's hands, his precious hands, gripping the wheel as they left the road and rolled. When the car stopped moving, it was upside down in a ditch. Elijah hung from his seatbelt, blood running down his face. His right hand was pinned between the steering wheel and the dashboard, crushed bones, shattered pain beyond description. But he didn't care about his hand. He was calling Sarah's name. She didn't answer. In the back seat, Grace was crying. Alive, conscious, crying for her mommy. But Sarah was silent. Her door was caved in. There was blood. So much blood. Sarah Elijah screamed, "Sarah, baby, please. Please wake up." Nothing. The next hours were a nightmare blur. Sirens, paramedics, jaws of life cutting them out of the wreckage. The helicopter taking Sarah away. The ambulance taking him and Grace to the hospital. Doctors and nurses and police and questions he couldn't answer because all he could think was, is she alive? Is my wife alive? She wasn't. Sarah Mitchell, Washington, age 37. Pediatric nurse, beloved wife and mother, died at the scene. Massive internal injuries. The paramedics said she probably didn't suffer, probably didn't feel pain, probably didn't know what was happening. Probably. That word haunted Elijah for years. Grace survived with a fractured skull, broken ribs, and a punctured lung. She was in ICU for 2 weeks. Touch and go. Machines breathing for her. Doctors using words like critical and uncertain. Elijah, his right hand in a cast. 3 broken fingers, torn ligaments. Nerve damage, sat beside her bed and prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Prayed the way drowning men pray. Prayed like prayer was the only thing left in the universe. Grace survived. Against odds, against statistics, against everything. She woke up. She healed. Slowly, painfully, but she healed. But Elijah's hand never fully recovered. The doctors tried. Surgery after surgery, physical therapy, experimental treatments. But the damage was too severe. The nerves too compromised. He could still play technically. He still had some dexterity, but the precision was gone. The ability to play fortissimo passages without pain. The endurance for 2-hour concerts. The technique that had made him great. Gone. For a concert pianist, it was a death sentence. For Elijah, it was losing the last thing that connected him to his mother, to his past, to the person he'd been before the world fell apart. He tried to continue performing, booked a concert 8 months after the accident, practiced until his hand screamed, thought maybe adrenaline would carry him through. He made it halfway through the first piece before his hand cramped so badly he had to stop, in front of 500 people, in the same hall where he'd met Sarah. His hand, locked up fingers, curled in agony, and he sat there at the piano, humiliated and broken, unable to continue. He never performed publicly again. Insurance paid for Sarah's funeral, paid for Grace's medical bills mostly. But the ongoing therapy, Grace needed the specialists, the medications, that drained their savings fast. Elijah took odd jobs, teaching piano to beginners, which felt like torture. Working as a session musician, playing simplified parts that didn't require his old virtuosity. Anything to pay the bills, anything to make sure Grace had what she needed. But he was falling apart, drowning in grief and guilt and loss. He started drinking. Just a little at first. Something to help him sleep. Something to quiet the voice in his head that said, "You were driving. You didn't see the light change. This is your fault. Sarah is dead because of you." The drinking got worse. The jobs got fewer. Grace, now being raised primarily by Sarah's parents, grew more distant. She was 7, then 8, then 10. She saw her father falling apart and didn't understand. Was scared of him sometimes, sad for him always. By the time Grace was 12, she barely knew him. He'd become the man who showed up to her birthday parties drunk, who forgot Christmas, who made promises he didn't keep. She loved him in the way children love their parents, even when those parents are failing them. But she didn't know him anymore. When Grace was 15, Sarah's parents petitioned for full custody. Elijah didn't fight it. What could he offer her? A studio apartment that smelled like whiskey and regret. A father who couldn't hold a job. A life of watching him destroy himself. He signed the papers, gave her up, told himself it was the right thing to do, the loving thing. It nearly killed him. He lost the apartment 6 months later. Couldn't make rent. Moved into his car for a while, parking in different spots each night, hoping not to get noticed. Then he lost the car. Couldn't make the payments. Couldn't afford insurance. And just like that, Elijah Washington, concert pianist, former prodigy, once called the next great American master, became homeless. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of shelters and soup kitchens. 3 years of cold nights and colder looks from people who crossed the street to avoid him. 3 years of trying to stay sober and failing. 3 years of thinking about Grace, and wondering if she remembered him. 3 years of walking past music stores and feeling his heart break all over again. 3 years of not touching a piano. Until tonight. December 23rd. The anniversary of Grace's birthday, the day his life had ended in a car on Route 3, the day everything beautiful had been taken from him. He didn't know why he'd walked to the Grandview Hotel. Didn't know what he hoped to accomplish. He just knew that something inside him, some part of his soul that hadn't quite died, had pulled him there. To that piano. To that music. To one last chance at the thing that had once defined him. And now here he was, standing in the lobby, the warmth overwhelming after the cold, the smell of wealth and privilege filling his nose, the piano 30 feet away. Here he was, at the end of his rope, at the bottom of his fall, at the place where there was nothing left to lose. Here he was, and Victoria Ashford, manager of the Grandview Hotel, was walking toward him with an expression that made it very clear he did not belong here. Victoria Ashford had managed the Grandview Hotel for 12 years. In that time, she'd handled everything from celebrity tantrums to kitchen fires to guests who tried to sneak exotic animals into their suites. She prided herself on maintaining the hotel's reputation for elegance and exclusivity. She prided herself on knowing exactly how to handle any situation. But as she walked across the marble lobby toward the homeless man dripping snow on her pristine floors, she felt something unfamiliar uncertainty. It wasn't just that he was homeless. She'd dealt with that before. Called security, had them escorted out, simple and clean. No fuss, no drama. It was the way he was looking at the piano. Most people looked at that Steinway with appreciation or indifference, or the kind of casual covetousness that comes from recognizing expensive things. But this man looked at it like a man dying of thirst looks at water. Like it was the only thing in the room, in the world. Still, this was the Grandview. They had standards. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice professionally polite, with an undercurrent of steel. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Elijah turned to look at her. Up close, Victoria noticed things. His eyes were clear, not drunk, not high. His posture, despite the worn clothes, had a certain dignity. And his hands, she noticed his hands particularly because they were trembling, but not like an addict's trembling, like a musician's hands, graceful even in distress. Elijah's voice was rough from cold and disuse. "I just want to see the piano. Please, I won't touch anything. I won't bother anyone. I just need to see it. Sir, this is a private hotel. The lobby is for guests only. I'm sure you understand." Victoria was already gesturing to Amanda at the desk to call Raymond, the security guard. "I do understand," Elijah said quietly. "I know I don't belong here. I know how I look. But that piano," his voice cracked slightly. "Please, just let me look at it." Several guests had stopped to watch. A couple in their 60s, dressed for dinner, clutching each other's arms with the kind of nervous energy that comes from seeing something outside their comfort zone. A businessman on his phone watching over his glasses. A young woman with her phone out, already recording. Victoria felt the pressure of their watching. This needed to be handled quickly, cleanly. The Grandview did not have scenes in the lobby. "I'm very sorry," she said, her voice hardening. "But I'm going to have to insist you leave, now, or I'll be forced to call the police." "The police," Elijah repeated. "For standing in a lobby. For looking at a piano, for trespassing," Victoria corrected. "This is private property. You're not a guest. Therefore you're trespassing." Raymond appeared then, the hotel's security guard. He was 62, a former Navy man, with gray hair cut military short and a face that had seen too much to be easily shocked. But even he paused when he saw Elijah. Raymond Victoria said briskly, "Please escort this gentleman outside." Raymond moved forward, his hand reaching for Elijah's arm, but he did it gently. There was something about this homeless man, maybe the lack of aggression, maybe the profound sadness in his eyes, that made Raymond hesitate. "Come on, friend," Raymond said quietly. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Elijah let Raymond's hand rest on his arm. Didn't pull away, didn't resist. Just looked one more time at the piano. His eyes filled with tears. "I used to play," he said so softly that Victoria almost didn't hear him. "A long time ago. It was everything to me. And I just wanted to see one up close. One more time." Raymond's hand dropped from Elijah's arm. The old security guard looked at Victoria, then back at Elijah, then at the piano. "You played piano?" Raymond asked. "Yes." Elijah's voice was barely a whisper now. Before I lost everything, I was a pianist," classical Raymond asked. "Yes." Any good Elijah's laugh was hollow. "Once. I thought so, anyway. A long time ago." Victoria was getting impatient. This was taking too long. The guests were still watching. The young woman was still recording. This needed to end. "Raymond, please, can you prove it?" Raymond interrupted, looking at Elijah intently. "Prove what? That you can play, that you were what you say you were." Elijah stared at him. I don't have proof. I don't have anything. My hands, they don't work like they used to. I haven't played in 3 years. I can't." "So you can't play," Victoria said firmly, seizing on this. "Then there's no reason for you to be here. Raymond, please escort him out, now." But Raymond didn't move. He was still looking at Elijah, and something in the old security guard's face had softened. Recognition, maybe. Or empathy. Or both. "My son plays piano," Raymond said quietly. "Classical. He's at Berkeley now studying composition. And when he plays, it's like the instrument is part of him. Like the music comes from somewhere deeper than notes on a page." He paused. "You look at that piano the way my son looks at his, like it's not just an instrument, like it's more." "It is more," Elijah said, his voice breaking. "It's everything." Victoria stepped between them. "This is very touching, Raymond, but we have a hotel to run. We have standards. We cannot just let anyone who wanders in off the street." "He's not anyone," a new voice said. Everyone turned. Dr. James Morrison stood at the entrance to the bar, a glass of scotch in his hand. He was 71 years old, distinguished with white hair, and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. He'd been staying at the Grandview for a week, as he did every December. Victoria knew him well. A respected cardiologist, retired now. Old Boston money. The kind of guest you treated with particular care. "Dr. Morrison," Victoria said, her voice immediately shifting to warm professionalism. "I apologize for the disturbance. We're handling it. Are you?" Morrison walked closer, studying Elijah, with the careful attention of a doctor examining a patient. "Because from where I'm standing, you're about to throw out someone who clearly needs help, not harassment." "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this is a hotel matter. And I'm a guest of this hotel," Dr. Morrison said mildly. "Which means I have a vested interest in what happens in this lobby, particularly when it involves a man being removed for the crime of looking at a piano." He turned to Elijah. "What's your name, son?" "Elijah. Elijah Washington." Dr. Morrison went very still. He set down his scotch on a nearby table, his eyes never leaving Elijah's face. Washington, he repeated. Elijah. Washington. The pianist. Elijah's face showed surprise, then something like shame. You know me. Know you, I saw you perform 20 years ago. Jordan Hall. You played Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was one of the most extraordinary performances I've ever witnessed. Dr. Morrison stepped closer. What happened to you? Elijah couldn't speak, couldn't process this. Someone recognized him. Someone remembered. Victoria looked between them, confused and increasingly uncomfortable. You're saying this man is actually... he's really a pianist. Was Elijah managed? I was. I'm not anymore. I can't. My hand was injured, and I lost everything. And I'm not that person anymore. Aren't you? Dr. Morrison asked gently. Because you're here, in front of this piano. And unless I'm very much mistaken, some part of you is still that person. Some part of you still needs the music. The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the fire seemed to crackle more quietly. Everyone was listening now. The couple going to dinner. The businessman. Amanda at the desk. Raymond. Victoria. All watching this homeless man who was apparently someone else entirely. Dr. Morrison turned to Victoria. I have a proposal. Let him play. One piece. That's all. Just one. If he can't play, if he was lying about his ability, then fine. I'll personally apologize for wasting your time. But if he can, he paused. If he can, then you'll let him stay. Let him play. Give him that gift. Sir, I can't just... I'll cover any complaints, Dr. Morrison said. Any guest who's disturbed any issue that arises, I'll handle it. I'll make a significant donation to the hotel's charity fund. But please, let him play. Victoria looked at the piano, at Elijah, at the watching guests, at her own reflection in the polished marble floor. This was insane, against every policy, completely inappropriate. But Dr. Morrison was one of their best guests, and there was something in his eyes, a certainty, a knowing, that gave her pause. One piece, she heard herself say. One. And if you can't play it, if this is some kind of con or trick, you leave immediately, and you don't come back. Understood. Elijah's eyes widened. Hope and terror warred in his expression. I don't know if I can, he whispered. It's been so long. My hand, your hand will remember, Dr. Morrison said softly. Muscle memory is real, Mr. Washington. Your fingers might have forgotten, but your soul hasn't. Play. Just once more, for yourself if nothing else. Raymond cleared his throat. I'd like to hear it too. If that's allowed. Amanda, the receptionist, nodded. Me too. The couple going to dinner moved closer. The businessman put away his phone. The young woman kept recording but lowered her phone slightly, like she didn't want to interfere with the moment. And slowly, terribly slowly, Elijah walked toward the piano. Each step felt like walking through water, through time, through the 3 years of silence and the 15 years of pain, and the entire lifetime that had led him to this moment. He reached the bench, beautiful leather, pristine. He didn't sit. Not yet. First, he just stood there looking at the keys. 88 of them. Black and white, simple and infinite. His right hand trembled worse than ever. The scars from the accident were visible now, pale lines across his knuckles. The fingers didn't quite straighten all the way. The doctor had said he'd never play again. Not like before. But before didn't matter anymore. Before was gone. This was now. This was all he had. Elijah sat down. The bench felt right, like coming home, like returning to a place he thought he'd lost forever. He placed his hands over the keys. Not touching, just hovering, remembering. "What will you play?" Dr. Morrison asked softly. Elijah thought about it, thought about all the pieces he'd performed over the years. The Rachmaninoff, the Chopin, the Liszt, and the Beethoven, and the Bach. But there was only one piece that made sense, only one that felt right for this moment. "Clair de Lune," he whispered. "Debussy." It was my wife's favorite. And then after 3 years of silence, after 15 years of loss, after a lifetime of music and pain, and everything in between, Elijah Washington's fingers touched the keys, and the world held its breath. The first note was hesitant, quiet, almost questioning, like it wasn't sure it belonged in this grand space, wasn't sure it had the right to exist. E above, middle C. Played so softly it was barely there at all. But it was pure, clear, true. Elijah's eyes were closed. He couldn't bear to watch his hands, couldn't bear to see the scars and the trembling. He could only feel. The cool ivory under his fingertips. The slight resistance of each key. The vibration of the strings inside the piano's body. The second note followed. D sharp. Then C sharp. The opening phrase of Clair de Lune, one of the most famous opening phrases in all of piano literature. Moonlight. That's what it meant. Light of the moon. Sarah used to say it sounded like water, like gentle waves on a dark shore. Elijah's left hand joined playing the supporting bass notes. His right hand was shaking the injured fingers, not quite responding the way they should. But they were responding. Slowly. Imperfectly. But they were there. The melody unfolded. Soft. Searching. Like a question being asked in the darkness. In his mind, unbidden memories came flooding back. Sarah, 29 years old, in their first apartment together. It was small, barely big enough for the two of them, and the upright piano he'd insisted on keeping. She'd come home from a 14-hour shift at the hospital, exhausted her scrubs, stained with who knows what, and she'd found him at the piano playing this exact piece. She'd stopped in the doorway, not saying anything, just listening. When he finished, she'd walked over and put her hands on his shoulders. "Play it again," she'd whispered. "You should rest. Play it again. Please." So he had. And she'd stood there behind him, her hands on his shoulders, tears running silently down her face. Later, when he asked her why she was crying, she'd said, "Because it's so beautiful it hurts. And because you're mine, and because I'm the luckiest woman in the world." The memory hurt. God, it hurt. But Elijah didn't stop playing. His fingers found the next phrase, then the next. The piece was coming back to him. Not perfectly. His right hand couldn't do some of the ornamentations it used to do. The injury saw to that. But the essence of it, the soul of it, that was still there. Another memory. Grace, age 5, climbing onto the piano bench beside him while he practiced. "Daddy, this one is my favorite." "Yeah, why's that, baby girl?" "Because it sounds like the sky when the moon is out. It sounds like nighttime feels." "That's very poetic, Grace. What's poetic mean?" "It means you described something beautifully, using words that make people feel things." She'd thought about that for a moment, her little face serious. "Then music is poetic too, huh? It makes people feel things without words." "That's exactly right, sweetheart. Music is poetry without words. I want to make poetry like you, Daddy. You will, baby. I'll teach you. I promise." But he hadn't. The accident had come before he could truly teach her, before she could learn to make poetry of her own. That promise, like so many others, had been broken. Elijah's hands moved through the middle section of Clair de Lune. The tempo picked up slightly. The melody became more urgent, more passionate. This was the section where Debussy had written animé et très marqué, animated and very marked. More force, more presence. Elijah's right hand protested. Pain shot through the scarred tissue, through the nerves that had never quite healed right. But he pushed through it. This wasn't about perfection anymore. This wasn't about Carnegie Hall or critics or the prodigy he'd once been. This was about Sarah, who'd never hear another note. This was about Grace, who'd grown up without him. This was about his mother, who'd sacrificed everything so he could have music. This was about Mrs. Chen, who'd seen a poor kid in an alley and given him wings. This was about every moment of joy and every moment of sorrow and every moment in between. This was about being alive, being human, being broken and still making beauty. The music swelled, filled the space. The acoustics in the Grandview's lobby weren't designed for piano performances, but somehow it worked. The marble reflected the sound. The high ceilings gave it room to breathe. The crystal chandelier caught the notes and scattered them like light. Around him, though, Elijah couldn't see it with his eyes closed. The lobby had transformed. The couple on their way to dinner stood frozen, holding each other's hands so tightly their knuckles were white. The businessman had tears running down his face, not bothering to wipe them away. Amanda had both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide and streaming. Raymond stood at attention, military posture tears on his weathered cheeks. He was thinking about his son, about the power of music, about how something so intangible could be so real. Dr. Morrison had sat down in one of the lobby's leather armchairs, his scotch forgotten. He was remembering that concert 20 years ago, remembering a young man at the height of his powers blazing with talent and confidence, and now seeing what remained after life had taken its toll. It was beautiful, heartbreaking and beautiful. And Victoria Ashford, who'd been about to throw this man out onto the street, who'd been ready to call the police, who'd seen nothing but a problem to be managed. Victoria stood with one hand pressed against her chest, feeling her own heart break and heal in the same breath. She'd spent 12 years managing this hotel, 12 years maintaining standards and upholding reputation and doing everything by the book. But when had she last seen something real? When had she last witnessed actual truth? Actual beauty, actual humanity? Not in 12 years. Maybe not ever. The music built toward its climax. The section where everything comes together, where the gentle opening theme returns, but fuller, now richer, more complex. Where Debussy showed that simplicity and complexity aren't opposites, they're two parts of the same truth. Elijah's hands, broken and scarred and trembling, found every note. Not perfectly, not like he used to, but perfectly enough, honestly enough. The melody sang out above the supporting harmonies, each note clear, each phrase breathing. The piano, that magnificent Steinway that had sat silent in this lobby for months waiting for the right hands, was singing. Really singing. And then came the ending. The gentle descent. The melody fading like light fading at dusk. Softer and softer. Quieter and quieter. The left hand providing gentle rocking accompaniment. the right hand speaking the final phrases like a benediction, like a prayer, like goodbye and hello at the same time. The last chord, played so softly it was almost silence. B flat major, a chord of rest, of peace, of coming home. Elijah held it, let it resonate, let it fade naturally into the silence it came from. And then it was over. For 5 full seconds, no one moved, no one breathed. The silence after the music was as profound as the music itself. Elijah sat at the bench, his hands still resting on the keys, his eyes still closed, tears streaming down his face into his beard. He was shaking, not from cold or fear or injury, but from the sheer emotional release of it. He'd played. After 3 years of silence, he'd played. And it wasn't perfect, wasn't what it used to be. But it was real. It was honest. It was him, and then someone started clapping. The applause started with Dr. Morrison. Slow, measured claps that echoed in the marble lobby like heartbeats. Then Raymond joined in. Then Amanda. Then the couple. Then the businessman. Then everyone in the lobby, guests and staff alike, erupting into applause that rolled through the space like thunder. But Elijah barely heard it. He was still lost in the music, in the memories, in the feeling of his hands on the keys after so long. He opened his eyes slowly, like someone waking from a dream, and saw the lobby full of people clapping. Saw faces he didn't know, expressing emotions he understood completely. And suddenly, something shifted inside him. Some dam that had been holding back 3 years of silence, 15 years of grief, an entire lifetime of music, it broke. His hands moved to the keys again, without thinking, without planning, just moving. He played the opening of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, another piece about the moon, another piece about darkness and light, another piece Sarah had loved. The first movement is famous for its relentless triplet rhythm in the left hand. Dum-da-da, 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 like a heartbeat, like a clock, like time itself, steady and unstoppable. Over that, the right hand plays a melody of such profound sadness, such deep melancholy that it's almost unbearable. Elijah's left hand, his good hand, set up that rhythm. Perfect triplets, steady as a pulse. And his right hand, injured and imperfect, found the melody. Each note carrying weight, each phrase asking questions that have no answers. The piece is marked Adagio sostenuto, slow and sustained. It's not showy, it doesn't flash or dazzle, it simply is. It exists in a space of pure feeling. As Elijah played, more people gathered. Guests emerged from the elevators, drawn by the sound. Staff stopped their work and stood in doorways listening. The young woman who'd been recording was now crying openly, her phone still raised, capturing this moment that would later go viral, though no one knew that yet. The first movement of Moonlight Sonata is about 7 minutes long. 7 minutes of sustained meditation. 7 minutes of darkness and searching. 7 minutes that feel both endless and far too brief. Elijah played every note. His hand ached, the scars pulled, the injured tendons protested. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. This wasn't about pain anymore. This was about everything else. Everything that mattered. In the 3rd minute, he thought about the night of the accident, the moment of impact, the sound of Sarah's last breath, the way everything had become before and after in one terrible instant. In the 4th minute, he thought about Grace in the hospital, so small in that big bed. Machines breathing for her. Tubes and wires and the constant beeping of monitors. And him sitting there, his hand in a cast, praying in a language made of desperation. In the 5th minute, he thought about the first time he'd tried to play after the accident. 6 months later, thinking maybe he could push through. Thinking maybe muscle memory would be enough. But his hand had cramped after 30 seconds, had locked up in agony, and he'd sat there at that piano in his apartment howling like an animal, knowing it was over, knowing that part of his life was gone forever. In the 6th minute, he thought about Grace's wedding. He'd seen the announcement on Facebook. Yes, even homeless people have Facebook when they can get to the library. Grace Washington marrying Thomas Chen. He hadn't been invited, hadn't expected to be. But he'd stood outside the church anyway in the rain just to see her arrive. She'd looked so beautiful in her white dress, so much like Sarah. And he'd wanted to run to her to tell her he was sorry, to tell her he loved her. But he'd just stood there in the rain, a ghost at his own daughter's wedding. In the 7th minute, he thought about tonight, about standing in the cold outside this hotel, about being ready to give up, about being so tired of being broken, and about the strange mercy of being allowed to play again. One more time. The final phrase of the first movement descended into silence. The last chord, a C-sharp minor, faded into the air and was gone. The applause was louder this time, but again Elijah didn't stop. His hands moved immediately into the second movement. The second movement of Moonlight Sonata is completely different from the first. It's marked allegretto, moderately fast. It's lighter, almost playful. After 7 minutes of deep melancholy, it's like a breath of fresh air. A reminder that even in darkness there are moments of light. It's short, barely 3 minutes, and it serves as a bridge between the profound sadness of the first movement and the explosive power of the third. Elijah played it cleanly, clearly. This movement didn't require the emotional depth of the first. It required precision and lightness. His injured hand handled it better. The notes danced. The rhythm bounced. For 3 minutes, there was something approaching joy. This was the movement that Grace used to try to learn. She'd made it through the first page before the accident, had been so proud of herself, had played it for him over and over, each time getting a little better, a little more confident. Listen, Daddy, I'm getting it. You sure are, baby. You're a natural. Like you better than me. You know why? Because you play with joy. I play with technique, but you play with your heart. The second movement ended with a brief ascending scale, a question mark, a transition, an intake of breath before the storm, and then Elijah launched into the third movement. If the first movement is meditation and the second is interlude, the third movement is pure fire. It's marked presto agitato, fast and agitated. It's one of the most technically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire. Constant 16th notes in the right-hand octaves and jumps in the left dynamics that range from whisper soft to thunder loud. It requires strength, stamina, precision, and absolute control. It's also, many pianists say, the sound of a man fighting against fate. The sound of rebellion, of refusing to accept darkness, of raging against the dying of the light. Elijah's hands tore into it. the right hand flying up and down the keyboard in patterns that required every bit of muscle memory he had. The left hand jumping octaves, providing the harmonic structure. Both hands working together in a dialogue of desperation and determination. His injured hand screamed in protest. The pain was immediate and intense, but Elijah welcomed it. The pain meant he was alive, meant he was feeling something, meant he was here now in this moment making music despite everything that said he shouldn't be able to. The movement is relentless. 7 minutes of barely controlled chaos. 7 minutes of technical virtuosity. 7 minutes that separate amateur pianists from professionals because you can't fake your way through it. You either have the technique or you don't. Elijah had the technique. Buried under 3 years of rust and 15 years of injury and a lifetime of loss, he still had it. His hands remembered. His body remembered. His soul remembered. Around him, the crowd had grown to nearly 50 people. Every guest in the hotel seemed to be there. Kitchen staff in their whites. Housekeeping in their uniforms. The night manager who'd come down from her office. All watching this homeless man create magic. The music built and built. Crescendo after crescendo. Faster and faster. Louder and louder. The Steinway responding to every demand, its rich tone filling the space. This was the sound of a man who'd lost everything, finding the one thing that could never be taken from him. This was the sound of redemption, of resurrection, of refusing to stay dead. The pain in Elijah's hand was excruciating now. He could feel something tearing, something giving way. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Just a little more, just a little further. The final section of the movement is marked più allegro, even faster. It's a sprint to the finish. Ascending arpeggios in the right hand, powerful chords in the left. Building to the final cadence. Elijah played it all. Every note, every accent, every dynamic. His entire body involved, now swaying with the music, pouring everything he had left into these final measures. And then, the ending. The last few chords. C-sharp minor resolving to C-sharp major. Darkness transforming to light. Struggle becoming triumph. The minor becomes major in the final moment, and it's like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Elijah hit those final chords with everything he had. The piano rang out. The sound filled the lobby, filled the hotel, filled the night. And then silence. Complete. Absolute. Silence. Elijah sat at the bench, head bowed, shoulders heaving, tears flowing freely into his beard. His right hand was cramping badly, the fingers curled in pain. But he'd done it. He'd played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata from beginning to end. All 3 movements. Nearly 20 minutes of music. For 5 seconds, no one moved. Then the lobby erupted. Not just applause this time. People were on their feet, cheering, crying. Some were embracing each other, complete strangers connected by what they'd just witnessed. Phones were out everywhere now, recording, photographing, trying to capture something that couldn't really be captured. You had to be there. You had to feel it. Raymond was openly weeping, his shoulders shaking. He'd seen combat, he'd seen death and courage and sacrifice, but this was something different. This was beauty born from brokenness. This was grace. Amanda had collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed. She'd worked at this hotel for 5 years. She'd seen famous people, important people, wealthy people. But she'd never seen anyone truly great until tonight. Dr. Morrison stood with his hands clasped in front of him, tears streaming down his distinguished face. He'd been right. The hands had remembered. The soul had remembered. And Victoria. Victoria Ashford stood frozen, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. She was thinking about her sister, her younger sister, who she'd judged so harshly for marrying beneath her station, who she'd cut off contact with because her husband was inappropriate, who she hadn't spoken to in 7 years, who'd died last month, and Victoria had found out 3 weeks too late to attend the funeral. She'd spent so much of her life judging people, maintaining standards, drawing lines between acceptable and unacceptable. And for what? What had it gotten her except loneliness and regret? The homeless man at the piano had just taught her more about human worth than 12 years at the Grandview ever had. Elijah finally looked up, saw the crowd, saw the faces, saw the tears and the smiles and the phones recording and the people standing and clapping like he'd just given a Carnegie Hall performance. And for the first time in 15 years, Elijah Washington smiled, really smiled. A smile that reached his eyes and lit up his entire weathered, broken, beautiful face. He stood up from the bench on shaking legs, tried to bow the way he'd bowed at the end of concerts in his former life. But his legs wouldn't quite hold him. He stumbled, and Raymond was there catching him, holding him up. This old security guard, who'd almost thrown him out, now holding him like he was precious, like he mattered. "Easy, friend," Raymond said. "I got you. I can't feel my hand." Elijah gasped. The adrenaline was wearing off and the pain was overwhelming. "Someone call a doctor," Amanda shouted from the desk. "I am a doctor," Dr. Morrison said, already moving forward. "Let me see." But before he could examine Elijah's hand, before anyone could move, the lobby doors opened. A gust of cold December air swept in, bringing snow and the sounds of the city. And a woman's voice, breathless and desperate, called out, "Dad! Dad!" Elijah turned, and there, standing in the doorway in a winter coat and boots, her hair dusted with snow, her face streaked with tears, was Grace, his daughter. Grace. The lobby went silent again, a different kind of silence. Waiting. Grace stood there, her phone in her hand, the video still playing on the screen. Someone had already posted Elijah's performance on social media, and it was spreading faster than wildfire. She'd been at dinner with her husband when it had appeared in her feed. Had recognized the lobby of the Grandview, had recognized the piano, had recognized, impossibly, the back of her father's head. She'd run out of the restaurant, had driven through snow, had prayed the whole way that she wasn't too late. And now here she was. And there he was. And 15 years of distance and anger and abandonment and grief stood between them like a wall. Grace, Elijah whispered. His voice broke on her name. "You're here. How are you here, your video?" she said, holding up her phone with a trembling hand. "Someone posted. I knew it was you. Even before I saw your face, I knew." She took a step forward, then another. "How could I not know? It's the Moonlight Sonata, Dad. You used to play it for me when I couldn't sleep, when I was scared, when I missed Mom." "Grace. I'm so sorry," Elijah said, and then he was crying too hard to continue. "I'm so sorry. For everything, for drinking, for leaving, for not being there. Stop," Grace said. She was walking toward him now, crossing the lobby, closing the distance between them. "Just stop, Dad. I'm the one who's sorry. You were hurting and I didn't understand. I was a kid and I didn't know how to help you. And then I was a teenager and I was angry. And then I was an adult and I was too proud to reach out. Too scared. She was right in front of him now, close enough to touch. Too stupid to realize that I was losing you. You didn't lose me, Elijah said. I lost myself. But you were always with me. Every day, every moment. You and your mom. You were all that kept me alive. Grace reached out and took his hands. Both of them, even the injured right hand that was swollen and bruised. She held them gently like they were precious. Like they were holy. I heard you play, she whispered. I heard you, and I remembered everything. Every lesson you tried to teach me. Every time you said music was the language of the soul. Every moment you sat with me at the piano and showed me how to make poetry without words. She was crying openly now. You said you'd teach me, Dad. You promised. And I thought that promise was broken, but it's not. It can't be, because you're here and I'm here, and we have time. I don't have anything to give you, Grace. No home, no money, no... You have music. Grace interrupted. You have this. She lifted his hands slightly. This is what you give me. This is what you've always given me, and it's enough. More than enough. And then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her father, and he wrapped his around her. And they stood there in the lobby of the Grandview Hotel, crying and holding each other, while 50 strangers watched and wept with them. Raymond turned away, wiping his eyes. Amanda put her head down on the desk, her shoulders shaking. Dr. Morrison smiled through his tears, thinking about the unpredictable mercy of the universe. And Victoria Ashford pulled out her phone and made a call. Hello? It's Victoria Ashford from the Grandview. Yes, I'm fine. Listen, I need you to prepare a suite. Our best one. The Beacon Suite. Yes, tonight. No, I don't care that it's normally reserved for VIPs. This is a VIP. He's right here in our lobby. She paused. And I need you to call Dr. Sarah Chang at Mass General. Yes, the hand surgeon. I need her here tonight. It's an emergency. A piano player's hands. Another pause. Yes, I'll explain everything. Just make the calls, now. She hung up and walked over to where Elijah and Grace still stood wrapped in each other's arms. Mr. Washington, Victoria said quietly. They separated slightly, though Grace kept her arms around her father. I owe you an apology, Victoria continued. I almost threw you out. I almost missed this moment, this truth. She took a breath. I'd like to offer you a room here at the hotel, for as long as you need it. And I'd like to have a doctor look at your hand. Make sure you didn't do permanent damage tonight. And I'd like... She paused, unsure how to say what she was thinking. I'd like to know if you'd consider playing here. Regularly. We could hire you, as our pianist in residence. You could play every evening if you wanted. We could pay you, give you a place to live, give you a chance, if you want it. Elijah stared at her. Couldn't process what she was saying. A job. A place to live. After 3 years of having nothing, after being thrown away by the world, after being invisible, someone was offering him a place. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Dad, Grace said. Please, say yes. Dr. Morrison stepped forward. I'll fund it. Whatever it costs. Consider it an investment in beauty. The world needs more beauty, Mr. Washington. And your hands, even injured, even imperfect, they create beauty. Let us help you keep creating it. Elijah looked around the lobby, at the faces watching him, at Raymond, who gave him a thumbs up, at Amanda, who was nodding encouragingly, at the strangers who'd watched him play and been moved to tears, at his daughter who'd come back to him after so many years of absence, at the piano gleaming and patient waiting for his hands to return. Yes, he heard himself say. Yes. Yes. The lobby erupted in applause again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just appreciation for a performance. It was celebration of redemption, of second chances, of the possibility of beginning again no matter how far you've fallen. Raymond stepped forward and shook Elijah's hand, the left one carefully. Welcome home, friend. And somehow impossibly, that's what it felt like. Home. The next hours passed in a blur for Elijah. The doctor that Victoria had called arrived within 30 minutes. Dr. Sarah Chang, one of the best hand surgeons on the East Coast. She examined Elijah's right hand carefully, her face growing more concerned as she palpated the swollen tissue. You've done some damage here, she said. The tendons are inflamed. You've got some micro-tears that need treatment, but she looked up at him, her expression softening. It's not permanent. With proper care, with rest and therapy, you can play again. Maybe not at the level you once did, but you can play. That's all I need, Elijah said quietly. Just to be able to play. She bandaged his hand, prescribed anti-inflammatories, and scheduled him for an appointment at her clinic. We'll get you fixed up, she promised. Music like yours, the world needs it. We'll make sure you can keep creating it. Grace never left his side. She called her husband. Thomas Elijah learned who was apparently a software engineer, and by all accounts, a good man who made Grace happy. Thomas didn't hesitate when Grace asked if her father could stay with them while he got back on his feet. Of course, Elijah heard him say through the phone, Your father is always welcome. Always. But Victoria's offer stood too. The Beacon Suite was prepared. A beautiful room with a view of Boston Common, a king bed, a sitting area, and at Victoria's insistence, a small upright piano brought in from storage. I can't accept this, Elijah protested when he saw it. This is too much. You're a pianist, Victoria interrupted. And pianists need pianos. Besides, she looked away uncomfortable with emotion. I told you, I almost made a terrible mistake tonight. I almost threw out something precious. I don't want to make that mistake again. Let me do this. Please. So Elijah found himself in the most beautiful room he'd been in for 3 years, with a shower that had hot water, with a bed that had clean sheets, with a piano within arm's reach, with his daughter sitting on the sofa just watching him like she couldn't believe he was real. I can't believe you're here, she said, echoing his thoughts. I thought I'd lost you forever. I thought you had Elijah admitted. He'd showered and shaved. His first real shower in weeks. His first shave in months. Looking in the mirror afterward, he'd barely recognized himself. The man looking back was still weathered, still showing his years. But there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope, maybe. Or purpose. Or both. Now, sitting in clean clothes that Dr. Morrison had somehow procured, I'm about your size, I think, and I have more than I need, Elijah felt almost human again. Tell me about your life, he said to Grace. Tell me everything I've missed. And she did. She told him about finishing college at BU, about getting her nursing degree following in her mother's footsteps, about meeting Thomas at the hospital where she worked. He'd been there installing new computer systems, and they'd quite literally bumped into each other in the cafeteria, coffee going everywhere. She told him about their wedding, and when Elijah flinched, she took his hand. I wanted you there, Dad. I did, but I didn't know how to find you. And I was still angry, still hurt. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, Elijah said. You had every right to be angry. Maybe. But I should have looked for you anyway. Should have tried harder. Should have, she wiped her eyes. I saw you that day, at the wedding, standing outside in the rain. Elijah's head snapped up. You saw me, Thomas did. He pointed you out, said, "There's someone standing in the rain. Should we see if they're okay?" And I looked, and I knew it was you. Even from far away, even in the rain, I knew. She was crying again. And I almost went to you, almost ran out in my wedding dress and dragged you inside. But I was scared. Scared you'd reject me. Scared you'd be drunk. Scared that it would ruin the day. So I didn't. I got in the car and drove away, and I left you standing there. And I've hated myself for it every day since. Elijah pulled her into a hug. No, Grace. You did the right thing. It was your wedding day. You deserve to have it be perfect, not complicated by your broken father. You're not broken, Grace said fiercely. You're hurt. There's a difference. Broken things can't be fixed, but hurt things can heal. And we're going to heal Dad. Together. They talked for hours. About Sarah. Grace had memories of her mother that Elijah had never heard moments from the hospital. Little things Sarah had said or done. Hearing them was painful and wonderful at the same time. They talked about music. Grace admitted she'd stopped playing piano after the accident. Couldn't bear it. It reminded her too much of everything they'd lost. But hearing you tonight, she said it made me want to try again. Made me remember why I loved it in the first place. Then I'll teach you, Elijah said. For real this time. If you want. I'd love that. Around midnight, Thomas arrived. He was younger than Elijah expected, 30 Grace's age, with kind eyes and an easy smile. He shook Elijah's hand without hesitation, without judgment. I've heard so much about you, Thomas said, and I just watched your video. That was extraordinary, sir. Please call me Elijah. Elijah, then. Grace has missed you terribly. I'm glad you're back in her life, in our lives. They talked for a while longer, but eventually exhaustion won. Grace and Thomas left, promising to return in the morning. Victoria had stopped by one last time to make sure everything was all right. Thank you, Elijah told her, for all of this, for giving me a chance. Victoria shook her head. You gave me something too, Mr. Washington. You reminded me what matters, what's real. I've spent so long focused on appearances, on maintaining standards, on... She paused. My sister died last month. I didn't even know until it was too late to say goodbye, because I'd cut her off years ago, over something that seems so stupid now. And tonight, watching you and Grace, I realized I've wasted so much time judging people, keeping them out, maintaining walls that didn't need to be there. It's not too late, Elijah said gently. To change. To do better. That's what tonight taught me. It's never too late. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I'm calling my brother-in-law tomorrow, Grace's uncle. He'll want to know I'm sorry, that She took a breath. Anyway, thank you for that gift. After she left, Elijah was finally alone. He sat at the small, upright piano in his room. His hand was still bandaged, still sore, but he played anyway, gently, carefully. Just a few chords, just enough to remind himself it was real. He'd played tonight, had found music again after 3 years of silence, had found his daughter again after years of separation, had found impossibly a path forward when he'd thought there were no paths left. Outside, snow continued to fall on Boston. Christmas was 2 days away. The city twinkled with lights. And inside the Grandview Hotel in the Beacon Suite on the 5th floor, a man who'd been homeless that morning played quiet music and allowed himself to hope. The summer evening was perfect. Warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze coming off the Charles River. The windows of the Grandview's lobby were open, letting in the sounds of the city, traffic and conversation and life. Inside, the lobby had been transformed. Not physically, it looked much the same as it always had. Marble floors, crystal chandelier, fresh flowers. But there was something different about it now, something warmer, more welcoming. And every evening at 7 o'clock, music filled the space. Elijah Washington, pianist in residence, sat at the Steinway grand piano that had been his salvation. He wore a simple dark suit provided by the hotel. His hair was cut short and neat. His beard was trimmed. His hands were clean, the nails carefully maintained. But more than any external change, it was his eyes that were different. They still carried sadness that would probably never completely fade. But they also held peace and purpose and joy. He played a mixture of pieces every evening. Some classical, the Chopin and Beethoven and Debussy he'd performed all his life. Some jazz. He'd discovered he loved improvisation, loved letting the music take him where it wanted to go. Some original compositions, little pieces he'd been writing in his room at night, melodies that came from his healing heart. The audience varied. Sometimes hotel guests would sit in the lobby's comfortable chairs, listening over drinks and conversation. Sometimes people from outside would come specifically to hear him play. Word had spread about the homeless man who'd made magic, and his nightly performances had become something of a Boston institution. Tonight, Grace and Thomas were there, as they were every Thursday. They'd made it a tradition. Thursday dinner near the hotel, then piano music from Dad. Grace was 5 months pregnant now, showing slightly under her summer dress. A girl, they'd found out. They were going to name her Sarah. Raymond was there too, as he often was. He'd become a friend, this old security guard. They'd talk sometimes during Elijah's breaks about music and war and life and loss. Raymond's son had visited once, had brought his composition portfolio to show Elijah, and they'd spent hours talking about music theory and creative process. Dr. Morrison was there as well, though he didn't live at the hotel anymore. But he came back often, always requesting the same scotch, always sitting in the same chair, always listening with that same expression of profound contentment. And Victoria. Victoria Ashford no longer managed the Grandview. She'd taken a position with a nonprofit that helped homeless individuals get back on their feet. But she visited regularly, usually bringing someone with her. Someone who needed to see what was possible. Someone who needed to know that falling didn't mean staying down. Today, she'd brought a young woman, couldn't have been more than 25, with the hollow eyes and defensive posture of someone living on the streets. They sat together, and Elijah saw Victoria lean over and whisper something, saw the young woman's face transform as she listened to the music, saw the moment when something inside her cracked open just a little. He knew that moment, had lived it himself. As Elijah played, Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue Tonight, the opening clarinet glissando transformed for piano, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From Roxbury to the conservatory, from concert halls to the streets, from despair to redemption. It hadn't been easy these past 6 months. There had been hard days. Days when the cravings for alcohol had been overwhelming. Days when the guilt over the years he'd wasted threatened to pull him under. Days when he'd wondered if he deserved this second chance. But Grace had been there. And Thomas, and the friends he'd made at the hotel, and the music. Always the music. He'd started teaching again, too. Just a few students recommended by Grace or Dr. Morrison or Raymond's son. Kids mostly, though. He had one adult student, a lawyer who'd always wanted to learn piano, but never had the time. Elijah taught them the way Mrs. Chen had taught him, with patience and rigor and love. His hand had healed as well as it was going to. Dr. Chang had been right. He'd never have the technical perfection he'd once possessed. Some passages were still beyond him. Some pieces he'd played in his youth were now impossible. But he could play, could create music. could express the language of his soul through his imperfect fingers. And wasn't that enough? Wasn't that everything the Rhapsody in Blue built to its famous climax? The big, brash, jazzy chords that sound like New York City in audio form. Elijah played them with joy, with power, with abandon. His right hand protested a little. It always did. But he pushed through. The music demanded it. And then the piece ended with its characteristic flourish. A triumphant ascending scale finishing on a high B-flat that rang out clear and true. The lobby erupted in applause as it did every night. Elijah stood and bowed, caught Grace's eye and smiled, saw her wipe tears from her face and laugh at the same time, saw Thomas put his arm around her protective and proud, saw Victoria talking quietly to the young homeless woman who was staring at Elijah with something like wonder, saw Raymond give him a salute, saw Dr. Morrison raise his glass in a silent toast. After the applause died down, Elijah sat back at the piano. He usually played for about 90 minutes total, with a short break in the middle. But tonight, he had something special planned. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said. He still wasn't used to talking to the audience, but Victoria had encouraged it, said it made the performance more personal. "I'd like to play something tonight that I wrote. It's called Sarah's Song, and I'd like to dedicate it to my daughter Grace, who brought me back to music, and to my granddaughter, who will be born in 4 months, and who will never know the woman she's named for, but who I hope will grow up surrounded by the kind of love and beauty her grandmother brought into the world." Grace was crying openly now. Thomas handed her a tissue, his own eyes wet. Elijah placed his hands on the keys, and he played the piece he'd been working on for months. A piece that started with sadness, with the ache of loss. But that gradually transformed, moving through memory and grief to something like acceptance, something like hope, and finally ending with joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. It wasn't a perfect piece. Elijah knew that. He was still learning how to compose, still finding his voice as a creator, rather than just an interpreter. But it was honest. It was real. It was his truth, in musical form. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Grace stood up still crying and started clapping, and everyone in the lobby joined her, standing applauding this small, imperfect, beautiful piece of music. Elijah looked out at all these faces, strangers and friends, people who'd witnessed his lowest moment and chosen to see his worth anyway, people who'd given him a chance when the world had written him off. And he thought about that night 6 months ago, standing in the cold outside this hotel, thinking about giving up, thinking it was over. How close he'd come to missing this, all of this. "Thank you," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure anyone could hear him over the applause. "Thank you." The evening continued. More music, more applause, more moments of connection between the man at the piano and the people listening. And when it was finally over, when the last notes had faded and the last of the audience had left, Elijah sat alone at the piano for a few more minutes. He played one last thing, softly, just for himself. Just a few chords. Just enough to say thank you to the instrument that had saved his life more than once, to the music that had never abandoned him even when he'd abandoned it. And then he stood, turned off the lights, and went upstairs to his room. To rest, to dream, to wake up tomorrow and do it all again, to live the life he'd thought was lost forever, to make poetry without words, to be home Sometimes we judge people by what we see on the surface, by their clothes, their circumstances, their apparent worth. We draw lines between those who belong and those who don't, between success and failure, between worthy and unworthy. But the truth is, we never know the whole story. We never see the full depth of another person's journey. We never understand the weight they carry, or the battles they've fought, or the beauty they still hold inside them, waiting for one more chance to emerge. Elijah Washington was more than a homeless man. He was a father and a son, a pianist and a teacher, a man who'd loved and lost and loved again, a man who'd fallen to the very bottom and found his way back up. But he was only able to make that journey because someone, several someones, chose to see his worth, chose to give him a chance, chose to believe that one moment of compassion could change everything. Music has a unique power. It crosses boundaries we build between each other. It speaks truths words can't capture. It reminds us that we're all human, all worthy of dignity, all deserving of second chances. But even more powerful than music is human kindness. The choice to see someone, to really see them, to recognize that the person asking for help, the person we might ordinarily ignore or avoid or dismiss, that person might be carrying a symphony inside them waiting to be heard. Every person has a story. Every person has worth. And sometimes the most broken hands create the most beautiful music. Sometimes all it takes is one moment, one person willing to say yes instead of no, one person willing to see beyond the surface to the soul beneath. Sometimes one moment of compassion can change everything. Don't judge the book by its cover. Don't dismiss the symphony because the musician looks wrong. And never ever underestimate the power of giving someone one more chance, because you never know. That person standing in front of you asking for help, asking for a chance, asking simply to be seen, they might be about to create magic, and you might be about to witness something that changes you forever. The end.